The last train. It was a cold, windy night when James boarded the last train home. The platform was nearly empty, just a few people shuffling around, their faces hidden under hoods and scarves. The air had a strange chill, almost heavy, like it was holding its breath. James pulled his coat tight around himself and stepped into the carriage, letting the doors slide shut behind him. As the train started moving, he looked round. It was quieter than usual, and the silence felt wrong. Normally, there'd be a mix of commuters and night owls, people talking, music leaking from headphones, the soft murmur of conversation. But tonight, there were only a few passengers, and they were all sitting perfectly still. James tried not to think too much of it. He'd had a long day at work, and he just wanted to sit back and close his eyes for a while. He found a seat by the window and settled in, watching as the lights outside blurred into streaks. The train rocked gently, almost lulling him to sleep, but something kept nagging at him. There was a man across the aisle, sitting 2 rows ahead, facing his direction. James couldn't see his face clearly, but he could tell the man was staring. He felt it, a heavy, unblinking gaze that sent a chill through him. James shifted in his seat, trying to ignore it, but the feeling didn't go away. He glanced over, hoping to catch the man's eye and maybe get a nod, a smile, anything that would make this less weird. But when he looked, the man's face was blank, no expression, no movement, just those eyes, fixed on him, like he was looking straight through him. Probably just tired, James muttered to himself. He turned back to the window, watching his own reflection. He looked pale, more tired than usual, his eyes dark and sunken. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to shake off the weird feeling that was creeping up his spine. The train moved steadily through the dark, and he lost track of time. Maybe he dozed off, maybe he was just zoning out, but when he looked around again, he realized something had changed. The other passengers were still there, but now they all seemed to be facing him. Every single one of them, head slightly tilted, eyes fixed in his direction. James's heart started to race. He glanced down at his watch, trying to focus on anything normal, but the time didn't make sense. The train should have reached a stop by now, but it was still moving, gliding through the dark as if it was never going to stop. He thought about getting up, asking someone where they were, but the thought of walking past those people, feeling their eyes follow him, made his stomach twist.
He decided to stay in his seat and wait it out. Maybe he'd missed his stop, or maybe the train was just delayed. That's all it was. But then the lights started flickering and the train slowed down almost to a crawl before stopping in the middle of nowhere. James looked out the window expecting to see a station, but there was nothing. Just darkness stretching out in every direction. The doors slid open, but no one moved. No one got off, no one got on. James felt his pulse hammering in his chest. He had to do something. He stood up, his legs feeling shaky, and stepped into the aisle. He was about to ask if anyone knew what was going on when he heard it, a whisper, soft and cold, like it was coming from everywhere at once. "Why are you here?" James froze. The whisper was low, almost a hiss, and he couldn't tell where it was coming from. He looked around, but no one was speaking. The passengers still sat, eyes locked on him, unblinking, unmoving. He backed up, ready to turn and run, but the whisper came again, louder this time. "Why are you here?" He whipped around and his breath caught in his throat. The man who had been staring at him earlier was standing now, just a few feet away, his face clearer in the dim light. James could see every line, every shadow, but there was something wrong with it. The features were too sharp, too perfect, like they'd been carved out of stone. And those eyes dark, endless, like they were pulling him in. "I'm just trying to get home," James stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The man tilted his head, almost like he was considering this. Then he took a step forward, and James felt a wave of cold wash over him. He stepped back, but his legs hit the edge of the seat, and he stumbled. The other passengers still hadn't moved, but he could feel them watching, waiting. "You don't belong here," the man said, and this time it was clear. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was something underneath it, something that made James's skin crawl. "I don't understand," James said, his voice shaking. "I'm just trying to get home." The man didn't respond. He just stared, and for a moment, James thought he saw something flicker behind those dark eyes. A flash of light, like a reflection, but it was gone before he could make sense of it. The train doors started to close, and the lights flickered again, dimming until the carriage was bathed in shadows. James wanted to scream, to run, but he couldn't move. He was rooted to the spot, trapped by the cold, empty gaze of the man in front of him. And then, just as the train started to move again, the man smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a slow, deliberate curve of the lips, like he knew something James didn't. Like he was waiting for something. "You're not going home," he said, and before James could react, the train plunged into darkness.
James didn't know how long it lasted. Seconds, minutes, hours, it all blended together. He was aware of the train moving, the cold pressing in around him, and the whispers, always just out of reach, like they were circling him. When the lights finally flickered back on, he was alone. The train was empty. The passengers, the strange man, even the faint whispers, everything was gone. He looked out the window, but there was nothing familiar outside. No stations, no signs, just endless tracks stretching into the dark. James sat back down, his hands shaking, and tried to steady his breathing. He didn't know where he was, or what had happened, but he had a feeling he wasn't going to find his way home. Not tonight, maybe not ever. As the train rolled on through the dark, he could still hear it, faint and distant, like a whisper carried on the wind. "Why are you here?" And James, with his heart pounding and his breath shallow, had no answer.